of a new $1 trillion open-ended entitlement is a fiscal train wreck. Add it all up, and the fiscal reality is that Obamacare busts the budget by $701 billion. I ask unanimous consent that a copy of Chairman Ryan's analysis be inserted in the record at this point. Thank you, Madam Chairman. This double counting of the Medicare cuts is a dangerous accounting gambit. Former Senator Gregg and I warned the Medicare trustees about it in a letter last year. I ask unanimous consent that a copy of that letter be inserted in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. A clear pattern has emerged with respect to Democratic rhetoric on the budget. They speak loudly about deficit reduction while continuing to write checks that this nation cannot cash. Madam President, consider the last debt limit increase bill, which included the much ballyhooed statutory pay-go scheme. My friends on the other side speak of it frequently, but they have also been the most frequent violators of both the spirit and letter of statutory pay-go. The Senate Republican Policy Committee analyzed all of the spending offsets and other budget restraints rejected since statutory pay-go was adopted. I ask unanimous consent that a copy of this analysis be included in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Total it up, and you will find that the cost of Democrats end-running their own pay-go rule meant almost $280 billion in additional deficit spending. Now, I think this point needs to be very clear. The Senate Republican attempts to force our friends on the other side to abide by the letter or spirit of their own pay-go rule were rebuffed for almost all of last year. This was not some mere academic exercise. And now the American taxpayer is on the hook for roughly $280 billion, courtesy of Democrats purportedly committed to spending restraint. Still, we are heartened that Democrats are at least claiming a commitment to deficit reduction. Talking tough is a necessary, though not sufficient, step toward getting our fiscal house in order. Similarly, it is a positive development that the President has endorsed passage of the U.S.-Korea free trade agreement. Maybe the administration is waking up to the importance of our pending trade agreements for our exports and the workers that make them. But the proof of his commitment to our exporters must go beyond the Korean FTA. We can no longer let our trade agreements with Panama and Colombia languish as we lose competitiveness and allow other countries to seize these markets for their workers. Talking about trade does not produce jobs. We need the President to take action and submit these agreements to Congress. And we need that action now. The U.S. worker cannot afford to wait. Passage of these trade agreements can boost our economy and our competitiveness without additional spending. They are important tools that we must put to work. If the President chooses this route, I believe he will find an important ally in Congress. I look forward to President Obama's proposals for prioritizing deficit reduction. There is no issue more critical to this nation's future, and I expect we'll hear quite a bit about it in the State of the Union address. At least I hope so. The President can count on applause from our side of the aisle if he presses for reductions in out-of-control spending. But merely relabeling new spending as investments will not make our deficits go away, and it will do nothing to tackle our escalating debt. The President must give serious attention to the legitimate arguments and concerns of conservative citizens if he wants to achieve anything more than a pleasant-sounding rhetorical flourish. President Obama did inherit a serious budget deficit, and our friends on the other side will once again applaud that line. They will cheer the assertion that they merely inherited deficits. They will spin the convenient tale that Republicans alone bequeathed the deficit to President Obama. But that is certainly not the case. And the record is clear. A Democratic Congress and a Republican President created this deficit from bipartisan policies that they jointly developed. To those Democrats who claim Republicans have no right to discuss deficits, they need look no further than their own actions. Take a look at the fiscal effects of the stimulus bill they crafted 2 years ago. Take a comprehensive look at the real deficit impact of Obamacare. Take an honest look at the appropriations bills that piled on double-digit increases in spending. American families don't have the luxury of 84% or 24% increases in their spending. They've made their priorities and restrained their spending. This is the American people from spending up here, restraining it down into this level. If we can do it, why can't the government? If American families can prioritize, deleverage, and live within their means, I hope the President will push his allies in Washington to do the same. All of us in Congress await the arrival of President Obama's third budget. The American people are demanding that he make deficit reduction a priority, and they're asking Congress to approach this subject in an intellectually honest fashion. We need to acknowledge that when it comes to the budget, the road to fiscal ruin has been paved with good intentions. In the name of fiscaling the economy, the Democrats' stimulus bill has imposed both short-term and long-term costs on the American taxpayers, jeopardizing economic growth and, with it, liberty and opportunity. That damage has been expanded with an unoffset extensions of what we were told were temporary provisions. As we start writing a budget, let's do it with all the fiscal cards on the table. Let's remove the political blinders and deal with the fiscal facts. And that means being realistic about expiring tax relief, its merits, its economic growth effect, and its political popularity. This is not a problem that we can tax our way out of. Getting our fiscal house in order is going to require hard decisions on spending. We need to put our shoulders to the wheel. We owe it to the people that sent us here. There's an old saying that applies here. I'm not the first person, nor will I be the last, to reference it in the context of our fiscal troubles. The saying is, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. We need to use our shovels to fill this fiscal hole, not dig it deeper. I look forward to this debate on spending. It will not be an easy one. But the American people have demanded that Congress take up this cause, and I fully intend to. Ultimately, I am confident that we will achieve meaningful deficit reduction. Yet I go into this debate with my eyes open. President Reagan in the foreign policy arena reminded us to trust but verify. As we await the President's State of the Union speech, Republicans trust that Democrats will make a nod toward deficit reduction. But we need to verify whether they are serious about getting this problem under control. Democrats do not have a great track record when it comes to cutting spending, but hope springs eternal. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
Yes, unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, on Monday, January 17th, our nation once again celebrated the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. as a national holiday. Signed into law in 1983, the bill to make Dr. King's birthday a legal public holiday was the result of a 15-year legislative effort. Although I was not a member of the Congress at the time, I remember well the national debate and eventually the overwhelming support that this legislation engendered. For the Senate pages on the floor today, for their entire lifetime, Dr. King's birthday has been a federal holiday. But they and all young Americans should know that the passage of that law was not certain and not without controversy at the time. Madam President, I was the Speaker of the Maryland House of Delegates in the 1980s when the state of Maryland took up legislation to make Dr. King's birthday a state holiday. And we were one of several states that passed state laws to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday. And as the federalism system works, as more states got engaged in this issue, the momentum at the national level became very apparent. And for the importance of this day and its message to Americans, the Congress finally enacted legislation in 1983. This holiday, which has appropriately come to be known as a day of service, would not have happened without the leadership of former Senator Charles Mathias of Maryland. And I'm very proud of the work that Senator Mathias did on this issue and so many issues that were important to the opportunities for all Americans. And I also want to acknowledge the work of former Representative Katie Hall of Indiana, the authors of the 1983 legislation. Without the work of Representatives John Lewis and John Conyers and their dedication of life to social justice, and also, I might add, the work of our former Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, this bill would never have become law, and I congratulate all of them for their work. Madam President, serving in the Senate today are colleagues whom I would also like to thank for their efforts to enact that legislation. The 1983 King Holiday Bill had 6 of its 34 sponsors are still in the Senate today, including Senator Baucus, Senator Bingaman, Senator Inouye, Senator Lautenberg, Levin, and Lugar, as well as the President of the Senate, Vice President Joe Biden. Moreover, 5 senators who were members of the House of Representatives at the time were original co-sponsors of the companion bill, H.R. 3706, which became law. They are Majority Leader Reid, Senator Akaka, Boxer, Mikulski, and Schumer. I thank them all for their leadership and vision in the 1980s as to the importance of making this holiday a remembrance to Dr. Martin Luther King. 20 years before its enactment in August of 1963 on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. King delivered what is his most well-known speech, in which he called for racial equality and social justice for all Americans. Madam President, in honor of Dr. King's holiday, I would ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a copy of that speech. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to ask that we vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I will speak for just a few moments on something that I think is the most important issue facing our country today, and I can't think of a better time than the first day we're in session here in the Senate in this new Congress, and that is the federal deficit. I'm proud to say that later this week, Claire McCaskill from Missouri will be joining me, along with Richard Burr, John McCain, Senator Alexander, and Senator Isaacson, in something called the CAP Act. And what it does is take us over a 10-year period from where we are in spending at the federal government level as a percentage of our country's economy, the gross domestic product, taking us from where we are today at 24% down to the 40-year average, which we've had in this country, as I mentioned, for 40 years, of 20.6%. This is something that puts in place a construct or a straitjacket on Congress that really allows us over time to take a methodical, thoughtful approach to spending at the federal level, but to actually have to do it. In this bill, which we also offered as an amendment during the lame duck session, it's now a standalone bill. Again, we'll be offering it a little bit later this week. We hope to have additional co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. But what it would do is take us from where we are today down to that average, and if Congress did not act responsibly, then OMB would have the ability through sequestration to actually take money out of both mandatory and non-mandatory accounts to ensure that we again, have that discipline to take us where we need to be. I have talked about this bill now. I've traveled throughout Tennessee. I've made about 46 presentations of how we in Congress could act more responsibly. And it's amazing that people on both sides of the aisle have looked at this and said, you know, this makes a lot of sense. And so it's my hope as we look at trying to rein in federal spending that this bill, I believe this bill is the vehicle. There may be other ideas, but I hope that this is something that we, in fact, will act upon during this spring. I know the President most recently has talked a great deal about this issue of fiscal responsibility. I thank him for that. I'm hoping that tonight, when he delivers his speech, he talks about the fact that we here in Washington have got to have the same kind of discipline that all of our folks back home have to live by. And again, this is something we've been working on for a long, long time. We tried to work on it in a way that in no way points fingers. I think people understand that people on both sides of the aisle are responsible for our country ending up where it is fiscally. And so we've tried to draft something that brings people together, that for the first time since I've been here 4 years, and I've just been amazed at the lack of discipline that exists in Congress, that we have no mechanism, no straitjacket, if you will, that forces us to act responsibly. And so through a long period of time, we've worked to put together a bill. By the way, it's under 10 pages. I think it's 8 or 9 pages long that actually does that. It has a smoothing mechanism in it so that when there are gyrations in our economy, we know the federal government can't react quite as quickly as a state or city can. That smoothing is averaged out so that we know what the target is in the ensuing year. But it really has tight constraints. It requires a 67-vote majority or 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House to override. So it's a very, very strong bill. Again, I think people on both sides of the aisle are beginning to embrace this type of thinking. It's my hope, again, that as the President tonight hopefully talks responsibly about our fiscal state here in the United States, that this type of mechanism, if you will, gains momentum. It's also my hope that we will vote and pass something like this along with actual budget cuts prior to the debt ceiling vote. I think all of us know that it would be very irresponsible not to act responsibly prior to this debt ceiling vote, which will take place sometime in April, May, possibly June. So, Madam President, I thank you for the time to talk a little bit about this. Again, on the first day of us coming back together, I can't imagine anything more important for all of us to focus on than to get our fiscal house in order. I know the whole world is watching us. I know people have said that we here in Washington don't have the courage to deal with this. I know the presiding officer has had to deal with this as the governor of a state. I've certainly had to deal with this as the mayor of a city and a businessman and commissioner of finance for my state. We all know that things are awry here. I think we have a wonderful opportunity in a bipartisan way to do something that really puts our country back on strong footing. With that, Madam President, I thank you for the time and I yield the floor. I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
A quorum call on the floor of the Senate right now. Senate returning today after a two-week recess. Today, senators starting the day with general speeches. Later today, they'll debate changing filibuster rules, and at 12:30, the Senate's expected to recess for their weekly party lunches until about 2:15. Before legislative work gets underway today, senators will determine if a Democrat proposal to change rules to end filibusters will be adopted. Senate leaders have been attempting to negotiate a deal to sidestep a floor fight over Senate procedure. While some progress has been made, more substantial revisions apparently are required to make the changes more appealing. Democrat senators appear opposed to getting behind a filibuster rules change on a straight majority vote, meaning that any bipartisan agreement has the greatest appeal for Democrats. And that debate, again, starting at 2:15 Eastern after they return from their weekly party lunches. We will have live coverage of the President's remarks during the State of the Union address. We start at 8 p.m. Eastern with a historical look at bipartisanship between past presidents and Congress and a discussion on the bipartisan seating plan for this year's address. The President's address begins at 9 Eastern. That'll be followed by the Republican response, this year being done by House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan. And you can take part in the discussion with your phone calls, your tweets, and on Facebook at facebook.com/cspan. You can also find out more about our social media connections by going to our website at cspan.org/SOTU for State of the Union. C-SPAN 2 will be simulcasting the State of the Union speech and also get live reaction from members of Congress as they're passing through Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol.
Mr. President.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, during the recent two-week recess, I was invited to speak to the Parliament of the nation of Lithuania in the capital of Vilnius. It was a great honor. This country holds a special place in my family. My mother was born in Lithuania. 100 years ago this year, my grandmother brought her brother and sister to America. My mother was 2 years old, landed in Baltimore, and somehow our family found its way to meet up with my grandfather in East St. Louis, Illinois, where a lot of Lithuanian immigrants were coming to take jobs that immigrants took in those days and still do. Hard manual labor jobs that gave them a chance that they didn't have in the old country. And so I was asked to come and speak to the Parliament on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of what has come to be known as Bloody Sunday. It recalls the time 20 years ago when Mikhail Gorbachev, as head of the Soviet Union, made his last desperate, violent effort to stop Lithuania from breaking away from the Soviet Union. I recall that period because I followed it closely as a member of Congress. You can still see some details of what life was like in Lithuania under the Soviets. The old police headquarters, the KGB headquarters, have been preserved as a museum, basically a horror museum, to show and catalog the torture and killings that took place there during Soviet rule. In February 1990, the people of this tiny nation on the Baltic decided they'd had enough. They swept the ruling Communist Party out of power in an open parliamentary election. A month later, in March of 1990, the new parliament voted 124 to nothing to restore the country's independence. They were the first Soviet republic to do so. It was bold. It was historic. And that's when Gorbachev turned the screws. He ordered Soviet tanks and paratroopers to stop the breakaway effort in Lithuania. In the early morning hours of January 13th, 1991, 14 Lithuanians, just regular people, common people in the country, were killed, and as many as 1,000 were wounded by those The Economist magazine described as the bullies of Vilnius. The crackdown failed. By August of 1991, Lithuania had won its independence again. Today, because of the brave efforts of those ordinary Lithuanians, it's a free country. It's democratic. It chairs the community of democracies and is a member of the European Union and one of America's allies in NATO. Imagine my surprise at what I saw during a stop in the neighboring country of Belarus. I saw a step back into Soviet times, a step back into barbarism that we'd found in the KGB museum in Lithuania. Sadly, though, this wasn't a museum show. It was real life. Often known as the last dictator of Europe, Belarus has defied the democratic transformations that have swept across Europe following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The country's been ruled with an iron fist for most of the last few decades by a strongman, Alexander Lukashenko. In Lukashenko's two-decade-old totalitarian nightmare, opposition figures, anybody who had the courage to step up and defy him, have been subjected to harsh repression and imprisonment. Over the years, those who might have been alternatives to Lukashenko in any election have disappeared or been thrown in jail. In fact, Lukashenko proudly still calls his police force the KGB. In recent years, there was a glimmer of hope that perhaps Lukashenko was going to move away from his dictatorship. A presidential election was scheduled for last December 19th, one that some hoped would finally meet the most minimum international standards for democracy. Those hopes were dashed when Lukashenko quickly claimed another term as president amid elections described by international monitors as seriously flawed. He ended up with 80% of the vote and said that was a good indication that it was a real election. He didn't get 99%, as usual. Lukashenko ordered his KGB thugs to brutally suppress opposition candidates, activists, and supporters who gathered in protest on election night in Independence Square in downtown Minsk in the nation of Belarus, December 19th, last year. 6 of the 7 political opponents who ran against Lukashenko and more than 600 of their followers were arrested. Several of the presidential candidates who are being held incommunicado still today face charges that could carry up to 15 years in jail. Their crime? They ran against him. And they lost. They get to go to jail now. Since then, Lukashenko's KGB has continued daily raids on the homes and offices of those with suspected ties to democratic parties and organizations, human rights organizations, and what remains of the independent media in Belarus. Lukashenko has ignored election monitor reports questioning the credibility of the election and international demands to release all these political prisoners. He's pulled his country even further into isolation and made it the subject of international scorn. He follows the old Soviet playbook. His government has tried to blame outside forces in other countries, everyone but himself, for the shameful political mess he's created. I was in Minsk last week, and I met with Sergei Martynov, who's the foreign minister to Lukashenko. And he pleaded for me to give his, quote, new democracy credit, close quote, new democracy in Belarus. He said, Senator, you live in a country that's had democracy for 200 years. We've only had it for 20 years. And he said, give us credit. When we arrested all these people, including 7 of the people who ran against him, we didn't use tear gas. There were no rubber bullets, no police dogs. Give us credit, he said. No, I said, you didn't use those tools, but you just systematically arrest and throw into jail everybody who ran against you. That's not even close to democracy. Mr. President, I had the chance to meet with some of the family members of those who are in jail. And I couldn't help but think that just a few hours before I had been in Lithuania, a 3-hour drive from Minsk in Belarus, where 20 years ago, ordinary people like these, families, stepped up and said, we are willing to fight for freedom. 14 of them lost their lives and 1,000 were injured. Just ordinary people. These are not the political class. These are folks who just are sick and tired in Belarus of the authoritarian rule. I want to show you some of the people that I met that I think are worth being part of the record here today. The first, and this was at a meeting established by our consulate in Minsk in Belarus. They threw out our ambassador a few years ago. So we have 5 people trying to represent the United States of America in this country, and bless them for trying. It's a hard job. They are constantly monitored, eavesdropped, followed. Life is not pleasant, and when we start getting down on people working for the United States of America, remember these 5 who are risking their lives for us every day so that there is an outpost for the United States and for freedom in this authoritarian country. This lady was at the meeting in the consulate offices. Svetlana Lyabetka. She's the wife of Anatol Lyabetka, the chair of the United Civic Party. Anatol has been regularly harassed, fined, and imprisoned for his political activities. In 2004, severely beaten by Lukashenko's police force. His wife told me in tears that her husband had been taken away and jailed, and she has no information about him, and that had been almost a month. She doesn't know what's happening to him or where he's being held. The second person, which I would like to make a part of this record, is Tatiana Severinets. She's the mother of Pavel Severinets, the head of presidential candidate Vital Rimashevsky's campaign. He's already served several years in jail for protesting previous sham elections in Belarus. That's right, thrown in jail for protesting a rigged election, when it's those doing the rigging that ought to be in jail. Her letters to her imprisoned son go unanswered. Her complaints filed against the government are ignored. She's been prevented from traveling, her passport's taken away for some time, and she told me it's impossible to find an explanation for what's happening. My son has been persecuted for 16 years. This photo shows, and forgive me as I struggle to pronounce these names, these people deserve better, but I'll do my best. Konstantin Sanikau, Alla Sanikava, and Lucina Halip, these 3 who were at the meeting. Konstantina and Alla are the son and mother of a detained presidential candidate, Henri Sanikau. Alla told me in tears that she'd had no contact with her son for 14 days, nor had his lawyers, no information on his condition. Lucina is the grandmother of the candidate's 3-year-old son, Daniel. Might have read about this little boy in a newspaper. What Lukashenko did was to arrest this presidential candidate and his wife and then say that the state was going to take custody of his 3-year-old child. The grandmother stepped up and said, I'll take custody, I'll take care of the boy. And for the longest time it was in doubt as to whether the boy would even be left with the family. They finally relented yesterday and said that the boy could remain with the family. This is a picture of him. Cute little fellow, Daniil. You see, in Belarus, you not only arrest the candidate, you take the boy out of the house and family. That was what they'd planned on doing. When they arrested the wife, Irina, a journalist and therefore automatically considered dangerous in Belarus, they decided to go after her child. Well, grandmother fought a winning battle and now has custody of the child. And let's hope that the American attention to this and the world's attention to this will make a difference. The last one I want to show you was one that was particularly compelling. Milana Mikhailovich is a 34-year-old mother of 2 whose husband, Alex, was also a presidential candidate. She told me of harassment by Belarusian officials since her husband's arrest. Mr. President, 34 years old, this young woman was standing there with her little baby girl, this beautiful little girl, scrambling around on the floor around her. She had a 10-year-old at home, and she was trying to describe how she was keeping things together while her husband, who had the courage to run for president and lose against the dictator, Lukashenko, sat in prison. Incidentally, they don't get lawyers. That's not part of the deal. Anyone who says they'll step up and defend the people who've been arrested are subject to disbarment as attorneys and being charged with crimes themselves. So it isn't exactly a fertile field of attorneys stepping up to represent these people. They take their lives in their hands to do so. And the families have no access, no communications, no correspondence, no way of visiting those who are in prison. They have no idea when they're going to be charged or when they're going to be tried. There is no indication that there'll be a public trial. Now, this is going on in Belarus today, and this woman, with her little girl, is trying to figure out when and if she'll ever see her husband and the father of this little girl again. The nightmare that she described to me was incredible. She literally has had her house raided by the Belarusian KGB. She's been stopped from going to Poland, where she was trying to find some support for her husband. And thugs beat her husband on election night. She doesn't even know how he is physically. Mr. President, I was so glad to be in Lithuania and to join in the celebration of their quest for freedom and independence. After 20 years pass, sometimes you forget how much courage it took for that to happen. But a 3-hour drive from Vilnius to Minsk reminded me. These people in Belarus are making the same battle today that was made in Lithuania and so many other places 20 years ago. They are trying to find one thing that we Americans take for granted every day: freedom. The freedom to practice the religion of their choice, the freedom to write a newspaper or do a blog, the freedom to vote for the candidate of their choice, their freedom to oppose government policy. And as a result of that, they have been arrested and imprisoned. Mr. President, I'm calling on the government of Belarus to immediately and unconditionally release these political prisoners. The fact that they continue to languish in jail without access to family, lawyers, or medical care is an outrage and an embarrassment to Europe and the world. These actions show the desperation and fear of a dictator whose reign belongs in the dustbin of history. The European Union will decide by the end of January whether Belarus should face renewed sanctions, including targeted travel and asset freezes against Lukashenko and his top elite political figures. The United States should waste no time joining in this effort. I have spoken directly to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She understands, as I do, that what's at stake here is today's fight for freedom, and what's in question is whether the United States will stand up and fight with these families. The European Union is prepared to lead. We should be by their side. We should be working together to put the pressure on this dictator to tell him that in the 21st century there is no place for the bully of Belarus and the terrible oppressive tactics which he's engaged in. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the afternoon call.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The junior senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, may I ask that the pending quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. From the Recovery Act to the Small Business Jobs Act, in the previous Congress, we passed a number of substantial pieces of legislation to preserve, protect, and create American jobs. The Recovery Act alone has supported between 2.7 and 3.7 million jobs, including 12,000 jobs in my home state of Rhode Island. This was vital in stemming the 700,000 per month job loss rate that we faced when the previous administration left office. Without the Recovery Act and the other fiscal stimulus that we passed over the last 2 years, the economy would have been much, much worse. While the Recovery Act protected our country from what would have been a far worse economic meltdown, the employment market is still weak and families are still hurting. Our national unemployment rate was 9.4% in December, an unacceptably high level. And it was higher still in harder hit states like Rhode Island, where we have had an 11.5% unemployment rate in December. As we begin this new Congress, our number one priority must remain job retention and creation. The manufacturing industry has historically been the engine of growth for the American economy. The manufacturing economy has been especially important in the industrial Northeast, particularly in my state of Rhode Island. From the Slater Mill in Pawtucket, one of the first water-powered textile mills in the nation and the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, to high-tech modern submarine production at Quonset Point, the manufacturing sector has always been central to Rhode Island's economy. Unfortunately, as American companies have faced rising production costs and increased and very often unfair competition from foreign firms, U.S. manufacturing employment has plummeted. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of manufacturing jobs declined by almost a third over the past decade, from 17.2 million people at work in 2000 to 11.7 million people at work in 2010. 6 million jobs lost. This decline has been felt most sharply in our old manufacturing centers, like Rhode Island. In Rhode Island, the loss of manufacturing jobs over the past decade has topped 44%. The decline of the manufacturing sector is a primary reason why Rhode Island has had greater difficulty than most other states in recovering from the recent recession. Over and over, I've traveled around Rhode Island to meet with local manufacturers, listening to their frustrations and discussing ideas to help their businesses grow. During these visits, I've heard one theme over and over and over again. Unfair foreign competition is killing domestic industries. One Pawtucket manufacturer I visited last week told me that they recently lost 8% of their business to a Chinese competitor. It's clear to me that if we want to keep manufacturing jobs in this country and in Rhode Island, we need to level the playing field for our manufacturing companies with their foreign competitors. Today, I will introduce legislation that will remove one homegrown incentive to move jobs offshore and help to make competition fairer for companies struggling to keep their factory doors open at plants here in the United States. The Offshoring Prevention Act, co-sponsored by Senators Leahy, Sanders, Boxer, Durbin, Brown of Ohio, and Harkin, would end a perverse tax incentive that actually rewards companies for shipping jobs overseas. Under current law, an American company that manufactures goods in Rhode Island or Montana or Maine must pay federal income tax on profits in the year that the profits are earned. That's standard tax law. But if that same company moves its factory to another country, it is permitted to defer the payment of income taxes from that factory and declare them in a year that is more advantageous. For example, one in which the company has offsetting tax losses. If an American company moves a plant offshore, it acquires this tax deferral advantage. It makes no sense that our tax code allows companies to delay paying income taxes on profits when made through overseas subsidiaries, but charges those profits in the year that they're made at home. And my bill will put a stop to this practice for profits earned on manufactured goods exported to the United States. To put it simply, our tax system should not reward companies for eliminating American jobs. The Offshoring Prevention Act is based on legislation that Senator Byron Dorgan offered over the past 2 decades, again and again. We can all remember Senator Dorgan coming to this floor right there with pictures of iconic American goods like York peppermint patties, Radio Flyer red wagons, Fig Newton cookies, and Huffy bicycles, to highlight the fact that the production of these American classic products had moved to Mexico, to China, elsewhere. On dozens, if not hundreds of occasions, Senator Dorgan spoke passionately on this floor about the decline of American manufacturing. I am grateful to his leadership on this critical issue and for bringing our attention to an unfair tax advantage that rewards companies for moving manufacturing jobs overseas. Last year, a version of Senator Dorgan's bill was included in the Creating American Jobs and Ending Offshoring Act. While a majority of this body, 53 senators, voted to begin debate on the bill, we were not able to overcome a filibuster to have a chance to consider and pass this legislation. I'm sorry that we were not able to pass the bill last year, and I will do my best to bring it up for a vote in the new Congress. Mr. President, keeping jobs in America and providing a level playing field for American manufacturing should not be a Democratic or a Republican issue. We all serve here in the Senate to represent the interests of our constituents, and our constituents want us to keep these good-paying manufacturing jobs in America. I hope that all of our colleagues will join me in passing the Offshoring Prevention Act to do just that. I thank the Chair, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, improving public safety, growing our economy, increasing energy independence, and protecting the environment have always been among my top priorities as a senator. Today, the very first bill that I'm introducing in this new Congress will advance all of those goals by allowing the heaviest trucks to travel on our federal interstate highways in Maine rather than being forced to use secondary roads and downtown streets. I'm delighted to have the senior senator from Vermont, Patrick Leahy, as my Democratic co-sponsor, and my good friend and colleague from Maine, Olympia Snowe, also as an original co-sponsor. Vermont has the same problem as we do in Maine. Thus, the bill that I'm introducing applies to our two states. Mr. President, in 2009, I authored a law to establish a one-year pilot project that allowed trucks weighing up to 100,000 pounds to travel on Maine's federal interstates, I-95, 195, 295, and 395. According to the results of a preliminary study by the Maine Department of Transportation, this pilot project, which ran until mid-December of last year, helped to preserve and create jobs by allowing Maine's businesses to receive raw materials and to ship their products more economically. Mr. President, also important, the pilot program improved safety, saved energy, and reduced carbon emissions. Let me give you a specific example. On a trip from Hamden to Holton, Maine, the benefits are obvious. A truck traveling on I-95 rather than on Route 2 avoids more than 270 intersections, 9 school crossings, 30 traffic lights, and 86 crosswalks. In addition, the driver also saves more than $30 on fuel, given the cost of diesel is probably even higher than that now, and 50 minutes by traveling on Interstate 95 rather than on the secondary road of Route 2. Unfortunately, Mr. President, despite the clear success of this pilot project and the strong support of the administration and many of my colleagues in the Senate, the House of Representatives failed to include my provision making the pilot permanent in the federal funding bill. As a result, for both Maine and Vermont, the program expired on December 17th, and the heavy trucks are once again unable to use our most modern, safe, and efficient highways. Mr. President, it's important to emphasize that our legislation does not increase the size or the weight of trucks in our states. Maine law already allows trucks weighing up to 100,000 pounds to operate on state and municipal roads. Heavy trucks already operate on some 22,000 500 miles of non-interstate roads in Maine, in addition to the approximately 167 miles of the Maine Turnpike. But the nearly 260 miles of non-turnpike interstates that are the major economic corridors in my state are off limits. This simply makes no sense. Furthermore, trucks weighing up to 100,000 pounds are already permitted on many federal interstates, New York, and the neighboring provinces in Canada. So that puts Maine and Vermont at a distinct competitive disadvantage. All around us, the states and our Canadian counterparts allow the heavier trucks to use the federal interstates. But unfortunately, Maine and Vermont have been excluded. That is why my friend from Vermont, Senator Leahy, has joined me in this effort to help provide a level playing field for our states. Mr. President, here are a few more important points about our bill. The 100,000-pound trucks are no larger or wider than 80,000-pound trucks. This change would remove an estimated 7.8 million truck miles from our local roads and streets. Increasing the truck payloads by 35% would reduce the overall number of trucks needed. In addition to saving fuel by traveling fewer miles, the steady pace of interstate driving improves the fuel economy of trucks by 14 to 21%. And the Maine Department of Transportation's engineers say that they are confident that our interstate bridges are safe and can handle the additional weight in the state of Maine. Mr. President, countless Maine small business owners have told me how this change would improve their competitiveness. For example, the owner-operator of a logging business in Penobscot County said that being able to transport his pulpwood to the mill on I-95 rather than on secondary roads would save his company at least 118 gallons of fuel each week. That benefits not only this small business, but also our nation as we seek to reduce our overall fuel consumption and reduce carbon emissions. The pilot program has also made a dramatic improvement for some of our communities. According to the Maine DOT, before the pilot program began last December of 2009, more than 200 heavy trucks heading north on Route 201 crawled through downtown Vassalboro, a small town of about 4,000 each day, even though I-95 runs parallel just a few miles away. During the span of the pilot program, the number of northbound trucks on Route 201 decreased by roughly 90%. These trucks were using the interstate where they belong. And I will tell you, Mr. President, that since the pilot project expired, so many of my constituents have talked to me about the return of these heavy trucks to the residential neighborhoods in which they live, to downtown Portland, Orono, Brewer, Freeport, other towns throughout our state. The fact is, Mr. President, that this kind of road congestion, of diverting these heavy trucks into downtowns and along secondary roads can lead to tragedy. A study conducted by a nationally recognized traffic consulting firm found that the crash rate of semi-trailer trucks on Maine's secondary roads was 7 to 10 times higher than on the turnpike. And it estimated that allowing these trucks to stay on the interstates could result in 3 fewer fatal crashes each year. Public safety agencies in Maine, including the Maine State Police, have long supported my efforts to bring about this change. In fact, Bangor's police chief joined me at a press conference last week where he spoke eloquently about the safety implications for downtown Bangor. In 2010, as a result of this pilot project, people throughout our state saw their roads less congested, our streets safer, our air cleaner, and most important, our businesses more competitive. And that's why I'm so committed to ensuring that these improvements are allowed to continue and are made permanent. Mr. President, this legislation simply makes common sense. It will benefit our economy as well as lower fuel costs and make our roads safer for motorists and pedestrians. Most important, we now have the concrete evidence from this pilot project showing why this bill should become law. I'm grateful for the support and leadership of my colleague from Vermont and the steadfast support from Maine's senior senator as well. I urge its swift passage. This is the highest priority that I have for the state of Maine this year, and I thank you, Mr. President. I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that a number of letters that I've received endorsing this bill be included in the record.
Objection.
These letters are from the Maine